Well, just a few days ago, we saw the bombshell news, the bombshell decision coming out of the Supreme Court of Queensland upholding a court case that was filed by emergency services workers who were saying that they should not have been coerced, they should not have been pressured into being vaccinated in order to keep their jobs. It's quite an extraordinary ruling. It comes on the back, of course, of a similar ruling out of New Zealand. Could the dominoes be beginning to fall? Well, here to talk with me about exactly that question is Senator from Queensland and for the people of Queensland, Malcom Roberts. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Topher. I love your work, mate.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And I certainly appreciate you taking time out of a busy schedule. You're actually in Parliament House right now. It is a sitting week, and we're very grateful you've given us a moment of your time. What's your initial impression of this decision?
Vindicated. The mood, and secondly, the mood has changed, Topher. We've noticed it here in the Senate, starting with the my motion that succeeded for drafting in terms of reference for future possible Royal Commission.
Mm-hmm.
That was one because the Greens and Labor Party were afraid to be seen to be opposing it. So we could tell. Plus, we know that there's a lot more awareness right throughout the community of injection injuries and deaths. That awareness is growing dramatically. People have lost trust in the health professions. They've lost trust in state and federal governments, and they want that trust back, and they want to be heard. So they're now starting to get really upset about this. I think that it's probably, you mentioned a point in the preamble that I wasn't aware of. So it's not perfect. And one significant aspect that you discovered is certainly a bit concerning. But at least it says that that the decision makers on the mandates were the Police Commissioner Carroll and John Wakefield, who's the Queensland Director General of Health. They did not take into account the workers' human rights.
Yeah.
Which is what we've been saying all along, you especially. And there's been no evidence that human rights had been considered. Therefore, he said the decision to mandate injections was unlawful. I mean, that's pretty startling.
It's pretty clear.
That's a really big takeaway.
It's pretty clear cut in that sense, and you've been one of the people pointing out from the very beginning the human rights implications of the decisions that were being made. This is where we see from the coverage in The Guardian, the court found the police commissioner, that's Katarina Carroll, failed to give proper consideration to human rights relevant to the decision to issue the vaccine mandate. That is pretty much as blunt as it gets, but you did allude to the fact that this, in my opinion, is not a perfect decision. We've seen some coverage by The Age here, and this hasn't received enough reporting, in my personal opinion, but not The Age, excuse me, ABC News, but credit to ABC for covering this. Arguments were also made by the applicants about breaches of Section 17 of the Human Rights Act, which says people should not be subjected to medical treatment without full, free and informed consent. I mean, that's the Human Rights Act. It's also the Nuremberg trials and the outcomes of that. However, Justice Martin ruled that this human rights limit was reasonable when weighing all of the circumstances. I have to say, this precedent now at law certainly rings some alarm bells for me.
Yes, I agree with you, Topher. My belief is that most humans, or overwhelmingly, you could almost say all but a few humans, not a few percent, all but a few humans will do care for others. When push comes to shove, they're in a position, they will look after each other. And you can bet that, and you can rely upon humans, if the government tells them the truth and they need something and they should do something that they don't really want to do, but they will do it for the sake of others.
Yeah.
What the government did was take that independence away, take that responsibility away, and force people. Straight away, they lose independence. And they lose a sense of responsibility. So choice, wherever there's risk, there has to be choice. And wherever there's choice, there's responsibility. So the government is destroying its own citizenry, not just physically by the injection mandates and their health and even their lives, but it's destroying the will of the people, and it's destroying the responsibility of the people. So that the responsibility is one of the most important things you can have in a community.
Well, you used the word vindicated at the outset of this interview. You could forgive those involved in the court case for feeling, on the one hand, elated. They've had a relatively speaking positive outcome. On the other hand, this doesn't really restore back to them any of what was lost. And in the case of those that have endured a vaccine injury, they may not be able to get back what has been lost for them. What's the way forward from here? How do we begin to put this scrambled egg back together?
Well, I think Cara Thomas, I contacted her and Dee Abel, the nurse, and Dan McDonald, who's been outstanding in his leadership of the Fireys and forming a new union in Australia. I just said, this is wonderful news. And they shot back either, yes, it is. Now let's see what's going to happen. Yes, it is. Let's see the next steps. Yes, it is. But first we want to read the details. So they're all wary. They've got to unpick it. We do know, I was talking to a lawyer, we do know that there is a stay on disciplinary action, which means the past sackings cannot be enforced. That's my understanding, my advice. And no future disciplinary action can be taken. There can be no threats of sacking. We had nurses sacked in Queensland just 3 weeks ago.
Wow.
And this only applies at the moment, Topher, to those named in the class action as plaintiffs.
Sure.
So it's a precedent, though. It's not automatic, doesn't flow to everyone, yet it augurs well for the future. So I'm guessing that it will translate into other people calling for making appeals to courts. But I think also, speaking of appeal, it's possible that the state government will appeal it. I'm presuming there's a big cost. I don't know the number of plaintiffs, but if there's a big cost, the government might try to appeal it, because the decision was not made on the merit of the case; it was made on not following process. But I think it's going to be politically untenable for the Queensland government to appeal, because the people's mood has changed. As I said, I think they'd be smashed in the election, even with people who volunteered to get injected. And I think that we've seen that mood change in the Senate. We've seen that mood change in the community, and so I don't think the state government will be likely to appeal. But you never know, because Stephen Miles was the Deputy Premier when these COVID injections were implemented. He had been prior to that Health Minister, so he's in it up to his neck. So it's up to him what he wants to do, I guess. But hopefully he'll just roll over and just say, this is what the court said and let's get on with life.
Well, life, unfortunately, does not give you Hollywood moments very often. And this is not a Hollywood moment. It is a win. It's another brick in the wall that we are building and the structure that we are building, where ultimately we hope to be able to stand on that and hold people accountable. But I applaud your efforts, Senator Roberts.
Excuse me, I'm sorry, I missed that. There's a division called and I had to...
Yeah. I was just signing off because I heard the bell.
So if you could repeat that. No, it's fine. I don't have to go.
Okay, all right. I was just saying, this is part of the ongoing effort in order to be able to ultimately arrive at a place of accountability. And you've been one of the few people who's really been pursuing this from the very, very beginning. And I applaud your efforts and hope to see that maybe the tide is turning. Maybe this precedent in Australia now, we had one in New Zealand, we have one in Australia. Perhaps this is the beginning of accountability. You say, final question, you say that the mood is changing. Is there a resentment from those that clung on to the lie for so long, or are they really actually genuinely coming around? And can we expect them in the near future to begin supporting perhaps some justice?
Well, it depends, Topher. The people in the street, the members of the community, there's no resentment there. People who volunteered and to take the shots off their own free will, there's no resentment because they know the injuries are stacking up. So there's no resentment in the community. But where there is resentment and where there's plain fear and where there's stubbornness and digging in of heels is amongst the bureaucrats, the health bureaucrats and the politicians.
Sure.
Pleasingly, One Nation was on the right side of this right from the start. Pauline and I called it out. Our state members called it out. The Liberals were on the wrong side. They implemented it. But in the Senate now, they're largely supporting us.
Yeah.
And the Liberals are showing encouraging signs. But the Labor Party, the Greens in particular, David Pocock, Jackie Lambie to some extent, they're still protecting the bureaucrats who caused this homicide. And it is homicide, Topher. I've checked with the lawyers before I said that. I've been saying it for a while. But the big people who are big defenders are the health bureaucrats. They just don't want to see anything. They don't want to look at anything. They just will not acknowledge anything. So what we're doing now is just dragging them kicking and screaming every time we get in front of them, Senate estimates, or we make a speech on this. We raise fundamental issues and we point to the homicide. And we point to this breach of trust being right through the TGA in terms of they're working for Big Pharma. There's absolutely no doubt about that in my mind. The evidence points to that direction. They're not working for the people. They're in it for the industry. We had John Skerritt, Professor John Skerritt, former head of the TGA, head of the TGA when they approved these vaccines, these injections. 8 months later, He's on the board of Medicines Australia, which is the single pharmaceutical industry lobby. He's advising them on how to lobby to us. He's advising them on what to do. He's getting money from Big Pharma, the people who have been given an enormous open door with no competition, just two competitors, no competition from the masses, and they are going to have a whole new class of drugs based on mRNA. So that's a hell of a conflict of interest in my view. Less than 12 months after he made those decisions, after he was head of the TGA, and the TGA has been swung under his leadership, I believe, to be just a shield for the pharmaceutical industry. And so I could go on, but that's about they're digging in because I believe they're guilty.
Well, I think history is, well, I know that history is against them, and it seems that the tide is turning in other ways, and probably the sooner they jump ship, the better it's going to go for them. The longer they hang on, the greater their fall is going to be in the end. Senator Malcolm Roberts, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for all the work that you do in this regard, and I know that you're like a dog with a bone. You're not going to let go of this, and there's many Australians counting on you, so thank you so much for your work.
We're gonna hound these mongrels down, Topher.
Amen.